With me on the podcast today, 5-time Canadian Country Music Award winner for Music Director of the Year, Amanda Kingsland.
Hey, how you doing?
How are you doing? 5 times. Like, when are they just going to name the award after you?
I don't think they should do that. I don't advise that at all, but it's definitely unique to hear somebody introduce me. I'm usually on the other end of that in my role.
You know what's funny is some of the most listened to podcasts that we've had have been with radio people, because you're right. A lot of the people in our industry know of you and they know of your public persona, but they don't get a chance to sort of get into that next deeper level. So I'm really excited to have you on. I'm a big fan of some of the initiatives that you've put forth and some of the great work you've done. And excited that as well, you're not one of those individuals who sort of started out as a career radio person and you shifted from format to format to format. You really loved country music from day one, and it shows in your passion, your knowledge of the industry, and your respect for the history of it. And so let's get a little bit into that, like your origin story. You grew up loving country music and having a real affinity for Canadian country, correct?
Yeah, I mean, I always wanted to be in the country music industry. I wasn't. It's interesting when you look at my sort of origin story versus others in the business. I didn't go to radio school and know that I wanted to be behind the mic. I wanted to be in the country music world. That was my upbringing. That was my family. And for a long time, I thought I was going to be Reba, but I didn't have the hair. So then I went actually to audio engineering and went the whole production route. And that's what all my background and my schooling is all in. But I mean, as a fan of the format, every time I went to something, I ran into the radio station and I would, talk to them. And for me, my access to new music, my access to my favorite music, my access to artists all came to me through that station. And so when I kept running into them, they finally at one point were like, "Listen, if you want to intern for us and hand out stickers at these events, you can come to them for free." And as an 18-year-old, I was like, "Sign me up." And that's really how I learned the different roles. Like my first day at the station, I met Doug Anderson, who was a legend in Ottawa, but in Canadian radio. And he told me, like, I don't just, you don't just hear me on the air. I'm the music director. I didn't know what that was. I was under the same illusion everybody else is, that the DJ just puts on a song. And so when I learned that somebody thoughtfully compiles that playlist and there's theories behind it and there's rules, there's structures, there's requirements you have to meet, I bought in pretty quickly and made that my goal and worked every job in the station until that was my job.
And that's where you're sort of aligned philosophically with artists, right? Like you followed your heart into something, which is really what a lot of artists do. Nobody ever follows their head into the music business. I always make jokes about that. It's like nobody ever goes, "Wow, pay me nothing to hand out stickers." Like that's exactly what I want to do. They have a belief in the pluripotentiality of the future because they're so enthusiastic, so full of zeal, and they love it so much. Now, as it pertains to curating playlists, this is what's going to be really interesting to the audience. A lot of that is done through many radio stations by virtue of consultants. But there are people like you who still have the ability to roll the dice, take a chance on a new artist if you see some promise in them or some potential in them. Tell us a little bit about that process, and then tell us how it's evolved over the years.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the fundamental behind that process, behind finding an artist that you immediately fall in love with, whether it's the voice, the story, the belief of what the potential is for that artist. There was an artist that everybody knows now, and my first time meeting her, it wasn't the song that hooked me, but when I heard her open her mouth in front of me and I saw her perform, no mic, nothing in front of her face, just looking at me at the radio station, I was a 100% believer. And to this day, I still spin those records knowing the impact that that moment had for me. And I fully believe that regardless of all of the different whether it's data or techniques that we use from one year to the next, that really for me is the foundation in it all. The belief in the artist, the belief in the song, the belief in the format and what propels it forward. And so I mean, I'm such a person, and as you said, like I didn't get into it with my head at all. I'm such a person that's driven by what I believe in and what I love, and knowing to me that radio is family, country music is family, community. Having that as the foundation, like that's really what it is for me when I take a risk. I never really look at it as a risk. I look at it as an investment. When I'm investing in that artist, when I'm helping propel them forward and getting them in front of an audience, I know that that's going to come back as a return. And, you know, radio is a business, so there needs to be that return. But for me, yeah, it's an investment. I'm going to invest on the early end of an artist's career because I know the impact that they could have at a later date.
Who was that artist?
It was Jess Moskaluk.
Good
Yeah, she
answer. She's a
and
client, also a
right?
lovely human being.
She's
Yeah.
a lovely human being, and I'll never forget the impact of that. In fact, about 4 years later, I brought her back, and that was on her very first radio tour. And you know, that first single, I mean, looking at her library, it wasn't the strongest of songs in comparison to some of those ones that we all know and love. But man, when she stood in front of you and she sang, like if that didn't make you feel something, I don't know what would. And about 4 years later, I brought her back and I put her in a recording studio with listeners. And that was our contest. And I really just wanted people to experience what I experienced. No speakers, no microphone, nothing in front of you, between you and her. And she stood in that studio. And I mean, I knew she could pull it off. You and I both know you have to have a certain type of artist that can stand in front of a group of people with nothing to hang on to and just sing a song. But she conveys so much emotion when she opens her mouth. And it's, to this day, that's probably one of my most favorite events we've done because it's just so different than everything else.
Yeah, the thing about Jess that I always find really interesting, obviously, undeniably, she has an amazing voice. She's a great songwriter, but she's so humble. I would assume she's bashful, right? Like she's such an introspective, thoughtful person, wants to be very aware of how she conveys herself, which I really respect because I could use more of that at times. Um, but she's very comfortable in front of people as well, and that dynamic is like almost impossible to teach. It just exists in certain people, and she's one of them.
Yeah, I don't know if it is something that you teach or you can teach. And, you know, I'm such a big believer in getting behind people that have that passion because I say all the time, you can't teach that. You can't teach somebody to want to do their best. You can't teach somebody to want to have that fire in them to make sure that everything they put their name beside is like at the max of what they can do. And you know, I'm such a believer of getting behind those people because you can teach all the techniques. I could teach somebody how to hit programming music, how to hit the buttons. But if they can't hear those songs in their head, if they can't understand what radio is besides a playlist or what our, you know, our products are besides a playlist, then, you know, I can't teach that part.
Right. No, I agree 100%. You must just get bombarded when you go to the CCMA week or Canadian Music Week. New artists, emerging artists approaching you, hoping to get your ear, get your buy-in. I think this is really important for the audience to understand, but I also want to be gentle in how we convey it. How do emerging artists approach you at times that is incorrect? Or what can they do that can sometimes turn off an individual in your position in the business?
I've never had anybody ask me about that, the timing part of that. It's funny because you and I mentioned, you know, every time you and I see each other, we could talk for forever. We're very like-minded. We're very passionate individuals, but we usually get 2 minutes at this event or 3 minutes at that event in a really loud room with a lot of other people who are touching your arms and waving at you as they go by. And it's usually a pretty broken conversation. And I feel like that's often where you end up, you know, where emerging artists get their opportunities as well. So I don't know that there's ever a bad opportunity. I think that in those times where like you and I would be having a conversation and I'd see somebody trying to catch my eye on the other side of the room, I encourage people to to not interrupt or be disrespectful in getting my attention or anybody else in the industries, but seeking us out at those events. That's what those events are for. They're networking events. They are events where you have an opportunity to get in front of somebody where it may cost you thousands of dollars as an emerging Albertan artist to come and see me in Ottawa or Ontario. So I encourage people to come and shake my hand and put a name and a face together. What I would say about what people do that maybe doesn't set them up for success at times is compare themselves to somebody else. I often see somebody be like, you're going to love my tune. It's just like Miranda Lambert. It's just like, I'm already playing those artists. The audience is already familiar with those artists. So believing in themselves and selling themselves and what they can do, I would recommend is a better approach. And the other thing is when people send me emails about their songs and they harp on that it's the summer tune is under such a time. If you haven't told me anything about the song, like if you're going to send me an email and you're going to lobby for your song, tell me why you wrote it. Tell me what it's about. I'll figure out how long it is. For me, that's not actually a factor. If you can hook me for 4 minutes, I can play you for 4 minutes. So that for me isn't the factor. But, so those are the few things that I find people do a lot. They lean into those things a lot. The comparisons and the not telling me about the project, but telling me the things they think I want to hear. It's the best summer song. Well, you know what? I live in a part of the world where summer's maybe 6 weeks long. If I can only play your song for 6 weeks, or it's only relatable for 6 weeks, that's not a great sell.
It's not a great selling feature. No, I think you speak to a really important point, and it's applicable across all domains, whether you're an artist, an employee, an entrepreneur. You want to find that distinctive uniqueness about yourself or whatever your strength is, and then really lean into that, right? And so I agree with you. When I have artists who approach me and they're like, listen to this album, it's just like George Strait. I'm like, yeah, but there's also George Strait, right? Like I want to know what you're bringing to the table that's completely different, unique, and proprietary to you and your art, because those are the people who end up standing out over the long term in a career, right? So I think that's a really important point, and I'm glad you made it. And I think that as it pertains to beyond the personality and the rapport and meeting people at events, what are the foundational pieces that an artist should have or could have in place that would substantiate them even more in your eyes? I mean, is it necessary for them to have a major label deal, or that's just an example? What is it that you go, okay, this person is taking this seriously?
So
they're worth investing in, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah. I mean, it's funny because my immediate reaction is to tell you to have some sort of buzz, some sort of hype. But I think there's multiple ways to create that. I think that if you have this following of people that's creating hype around you, that's creating hype around a single, that are engaging with you and making things pop up in my feed over and over again, that's creating a buzz. And or maybe on the other end, you're a phenomenal songwriter, you have a bunch of connections in the industry with producers and they're reaching out and saying, oh, I got to hear this track. Like I've had songs come at me from every single different possibility you can think of, whether it's some submission online, whether it's a producer or a fellow songwriter saying, hey, like you got to check this out. I've had artists, like major artists, text me other artists' songs saying you got to hear this, because they know that I'm such a geek for that part of the business. I love to find a great song. And so they come at you from so many different angles. But I'd say if you could capture that buzz, if you can make somebody else excited about you, there's no better testimonial than somebody else telling your story and feeling it. So if you can make others excited about your product, it makes it a lot harder. And the other thing I tell everybody, and I'm sure others in radio may disagree or may hate that I tell everybody this, but building those relationships is super important. Getting yourself, asking for can I have 5 minutes of your time so that we can meet like this? You can see what I look like. And that way, when I bombard you with emails, which they should, that's what their job is, that you know who it is. And I always try to make time. Sometimes it's a couple weeks from when I get the email just because of timing and getting it all in. But I'm such a big believer in relationships and the thought that it's hard to say no to a friend. if I've made a connection with you and I believe in you, I want to go to bat for you. And so, taking those relationships to the next level, trying to find ways to make sure that you're staying top of mind and creating that buzz, those things for me are the intangibles I think push you further than a letter on my desk that says, it was written by this great writer, or it was, it. I think that if you can create buzz, it goes really far to have, if you can make people's heads turn without you having to say anything, and it's all from the work that you've done, like that's a great way to stand out from the crowd.
There's something to be said for the value of recruiting evangelists, right? Like people who just sing your praises no matter what you're doing, or not no matter what you're doing, but sing your praises about your art, your brand, and I agree. I mean, if I'm interested in working with an artist or investing time in an artist, um, one thing that really excites me is when I hear other people in the industry who I also respect saying, "Hey, listen, like this artist is the real deal." And then data points are also imperative too, and I think you sort of touched on that. But I think more and more as we come to radio with this compelling case to play tracks from artists who maybe have been around for a while or are emerging, um, it's what can we do to mitigate your risk? What can we do to give you data points, whether it's streaming, whether it's a viral sensation on YouTube, whether it's a lyric video that's got, 500,000 streams? Like, what is it that an artist or an artist management camp or a label can bring to you to really make that case and make you feel as though if you roll the dice on this artist, you're not going to alienate your listeners. There's a demand for it in the marketplace.
Oh, there's so many different ways to do that now. Like, I don't know that there's one thing that, that substantiates a request to get airplay, whether it's a huge social following, whether it's something like really viral that you did that even wasn't your singing, but has shown a personality that we know, fits in this industry. I think that's a really important thing to bring up too, is that we want people to have the talent behind the voice or the song, but a big part of what happens is how you set yourself apart. And I know we're going to go down the road of the females in our industry, but one thing I feel like we've done that's been done really, really well is they've created lanes, and artists that you see that are super successful in this industry and really across the entertainment industry have been able to create a brand and kind of create what that is for them and keep things between the goalposts, right? So you always know what you're expecting from that artist, even if it's unexpected. Even if something really great comes at you and it's totally unexpected, it's still on brand and it's still what, the brand has promised that you're going to get from that artist. And so if with one artist it's a viral video that makes me turn my head and take notice of it and feel like there's less of a risk because we're already seeing reaction. If with another artist it's huge streams through DSP, if with another artist it's crazy touring numbers and getting to play with big acts and seeing that response from live audience or from their following, there's a lot of different ways to quantify and figure out how things are, what's successful. And I don't know that it's the same for any of the people, even in your camp. Like for any artist, people react in such different ways with different artists. And so I think that when you can come with a story and it leads down any of those paths, you're mitigating that risk.
Yeah, and to speak to your point earlier, one of the things that I really appreciate you is that you've continued to be an advocate and a trailblazer, and roll the dice on new artists or take chances in the marketplace. Um, and I've talked about this on other podcasts, how I feel that radio still needs some trailblazers to take ownership of the vanguard of our format, because we have consciously or unconsciously ceded that territory to the streaming services in many cases, right? Where you want to substantiate a case to take a single to radio, and you might do that by virtue of getting streams on Spotify and Apple Music. But because of that, you are putting Apple Music and Spotify in more of a gatekeeper role. And that role has always been reserved for radio, especially in country music, where it's still a pillar of cultural awareness, right? Like you really need a hit at country radio if you really want to translate. So I think it's really important to have people like you in the business who continue to uh, be on the new frontier of what's next in our format and take some chances, because I do think it's a little dangerous, or at least precarious, for us to completely cede that territory of discovery to the streaming services.
Well, I think it goes both ways too. I think that it's really easy data for labels and teams to present to radio. And so therefore, a lot of times you're seeing teams change their tactics and release music to DSPs before releasing it to radio so that they can come with a story. And one of the things that I always say is that it's unacceptable for me to say that I can't play a song because it hasn't been serviced to radio. What a lot of listeners don't know is that, there are rules around what we are to be playing and how we get that music, and whether we're, what it's a commercial business, our radio stations. So we shouldn't be playing personal copies of music. There's just rules around that type of stuff that we all should be adhering to. So when a team releases music to DSPs, like I never want to say no. If there's buzz around the artist and I'm getting requests, I should never say, I can't play that on radio, go find it on every other platform. But that is part of the strategy for teams at this point, because they want to be able to come to radio for information. Now, so I do think it's both sides of the story, because radio wants that data. Some people really live by it. For me, it's just another thing in the toolkit. If the song is getting tons and tons of traction, but it still really doesn't fit into the playlist and have and everything else that our product is presenting as a brand, I'm still not going to play it. If the song is absolutely fantastic, fits perfectly into what we're trying to present as a brand, and doesn't have a million streams, I'm going to play it. It's just another tool in the toolkit for me. But I do understand, like, everybody runs their business differently, whether it's being able to have that data to present to somebody or requiring that data before playing a song. Everybody has the right to run things as they see fit. So, but I agree with you. In country music, radio is still a huge platform for discovery, and I'd love to see that remain. And I do think that with our audience, whether you're in a truck for 8 hours, whether your hands are under the hood of a car, and when a song comes on that you've never heard, you don't really like the sound of, you can't go turn it down. You're going to listen to it rather than give it 10 seconds and skip it. And then, it's going to come back on 4 hours later and you're like, oh, this song, you're still not going to go change it. You're going to hear it. By the third or fourth time you hear that song, you're probably going to be tapping your foot versus having skipped it and not given it that chance in the first 10 seconds. So that's one thing I love about radio, and with our audience, they really do carry it with them. One thing we see with country music is time spent listening, which is a term we use in radio, is huge. Audiences love the format. They turn it on and they leave it on, and we're really part of their lives. So we play a big part in artist discovery because of that. And I agree with you. I think that it would be amazing if that could remain a big part of country radio.
Yeah, that's why we need more people like you who are willing to roll the dice, take those chances, and discover some new future success stories in our business. Some of the other initiatives that you have instigated, which I've been a big fan of, is the Fave 5 Females campaign, raising funds for women in music in Canada. Tell us a little bit about what that is for people who may not know, and
Sure.
And how successful it's been.
Yeah, it was sort of a two-pronged thing. I can't even tell you how many events, how many industry events, how many CCMAs, CMWs, things I go to, and it's easy to become discouraged. It's a big industry. It moves fast. It's intimidating. And so, it's easy to be discouraged. But I was sitting on a panel of women in music, and we were getting asked the same questions over and over. It was quite literally breaking my heart. It was a lot of what women are being told, whether in our industry, not specifically by radio or specifically by labels, but what is being set out by the industry for what women need to be. And I've faced a lot of this myself, kind of coming up the ranks through the radio industry. But I just kind of decided that I was going to make a shirt the next year when I was on a different panel, but I made a shirt that had 5 females that had been fairly successful that year. None of them had had number ones, but nobody had had number ones as a female in country music at that point in 12 years. And so I just made a shirt and I put 5 names on it. The names of kind of it was actually the 5 females that were all nominated that year for Female Artist of the Year. And I wore it to the panel. And man, it turned heads, and people asked about it and they wanted to know where to get it and why I was wearing it. And it was really just a shout out to the fact that these 5 females were crushing it in our industry. They were nominated for Female Artist of the Year, yet they could not top the charts. There wasn't enough support. There wasn't enough airplay. It wasn't equal. And this is 3 years ago, and I'm proud of what's happened in 3 years, but we went from having not one of those females on that shirt having a number one song to having 6 number ones by females within 18 months. And that was partnered, the shirts were really cool. People could go online, type in their fave 5 and support it. And so, we had people who had all sorts of artists on their shirts, whether it was Dolly Parton, whether it was outside the format. We had a local singer-songwriter in Ottawa who has Alanis on her shirt. And I think that's great because everybody's influenced by different women. I've seen people, on International Women's Day, I've seen people who have like their mom and their sister. And like, it was just a way to get the word out about the fact that those girls should be on shirts. We should be wearing their merch. We should be buying the tickets. We should be playing the song. So that's kind of where it started, and it really took off and caught a lot of fire. And the reason it did that was because the conversation was necessary. We needed to draw attention to the fact that we were not doing a good enough job. And I know as a mom of 2 little girls, and I know you as a dad of 2 little girls, I see my kids sitting in the car singing along to all the female artists, and they really believe that they keep singing like that, they're going to get to be on the radio too. And I can't tell you how many times I've had conversations with those female artists, the same ones they're singing with, where we're all in tears because the disappointment is heartbreaking when you can't argue how great they are, yet there's such a difference in the number of spins that they were getting. So it was just a necessary conversation, and it didn't make me popular in the industry at all with my peers, but it was the right conversation to start. It was necessary. And I think that's usually what you end up seeing, right? You end up seeing conversations that are necessary, not be easy. And usually what I say is it's never easy to do the right thing, but it's always right to do the right thing.
Yeah, and I think that to be fair, there were probably people who didn't like the fact that you were taking up this charge, but there were a lot of people who felt like it was time for the conversation, but maybe just didn't know how to initiate it. And you did it in a way that was very positive and exemplified some of the success stories in the business, rather than sort of focusing on the victimhood status of it, right? Which I think is also part of the conversation. But the fact that you said, no, there are women crushing it. Here are some of them. And here's what we need to draw attention to as an industry in order to encourage more women to take up the charge to get in this crazy ass business and pursue their dreams, right? And I think that's a big part of it. I've talked about this on other podcasts, how some research through the DSPs was able to reveal a statistic that really spoke to me, and that is that 12% of all the music within country music serviced independently or through major labels to DSPs is performed by female vocalists. So to me, and I want to get your take on this, obviously, because I think it's a multivariate equation. But to me, it's like, how do we encourage more women to get into this business? Because if 88 participants are men and 12 are women, obviously at the top end of airplay, that's going to bear itself out 9-1, essentially, right? So what is the problem, and how do we systematically fix it over time? Is it 50-50 gender neutral airplay, and putting more women on the radio will encourage more young women to, or I shouldn't say young women, women of any age, to be encouraged to perform music and exemplify their art. I don't know what the solution is, but I think it's important to have these conversations and try to figure out as best as we
Yeah.
can what it might be.
Yeah, and it's great that you bring that up, because it's one thing that I do try to make sure is clear is this is not all on radio to fix. This is an industry issue that is happening. And and I'll give credit to Canadian country radio and the Canadian industry, because we have made strides. We've had these conversations, and we are asking the right questions, and we are consciously making efforts to make a difference. And I do think that's really important. But like you said, if 12% of what is coming across my desk is female, how can I play 50-50 and not completely exhaust that playlist of those 12 of 100 females? And so it's extremely difficult. Now, we've had a lot of conversations, our stations, without me actually sitting down and purposefully consciously making it 50-50. I run close to 50 anyways. We consciously add, but now I understand our product is a little bit different because we do play a very wide range of country music. It's not just today's country. So when I say that, we're playing close to 50, I'm not saying that that's because it's all current. That's also your Trisha Yearwoods, and that's your Michelle Wrights. And so we do go we do go wider in the genre for that, in the eras for that. But it's being aware of it, it's having the conversations, and it's changing it. It's a cyclical problem, right? Like, I need more to come across my desk, which means there needs to be more resources and availability for female artists to get great songs, work with great producers, make sure that what is coming across my desk, because it's great to say that 12 songs of 100 were by females, but not all 12 of those were ready for radio. If we're looking at the fact that some were independent and some were, females don't have the same opportunity to get songs written by great writers, to get in rooms with great producers, to have trackers or a team of people behind them to push that music forward. So it's a cyclical problem. Like, it would be great if everybody could play their part. If the fans streamed the music more, bought the tickets, got behind the artists, wore the merch, had that passion that they do for the same artists that are male, that would be great. Because what it would do is it would drive up awareness for labels to then invest in females, for teams, management teams to invest in females, sign them to big shows. It's not just radio. We see these huge festivals where you have one female over a 3-day weekend. If there's no stage time, then how does that artist make money? Because you and I both know it's not necessarily in radio singles, especially if you didn't write the song. So, it's very interesting. We need every person in the business to step up and take it seriously and do their part, or else it can't just fall to radio. Does radio need to do better? 100%. I'm super proud of the Canadian industry for having these conversations. I've had conversations with people from every single broadcast company, every part of the business. I've reached out, they've reached out. We've had great conversations. And a lot of them, we don't land on the same thought process. We're not in the same field of thinking, but the conversation is super important. And that's what makes me the most happy, because I think that I walk away thinking about something different, knowing their perspective, and hopefully that happens to them as well. So I'm super proud of that initiative, and the on-air portion that went with it. So I think that we saw a lot of stations and a lot of companies get behind. I saw a lot of my friends in the industry that work for different broadcasters have Fave 5 shirts. And that's sort of what it's about, right? It's that camaraderie to move an effort, and have impact and move that forward all together.
Yeah, and I think the conversation of women supporting women, is also really important, because obviously, because of the proportions in our industry, it becomes hyper competitive. And the reality is, too, generally women make 80% of the consumer decisions in households. So it's also making a very important component of the population aware that their consumer choices actually affect what happens on these festival lineups, what happens in terms of radio airplay, whether or not labels are more willing to endow and invest in female artists. So I love the fact that you articulated what you just did there, that it's a broad spread problem, and it's a multivariate problem. It's not univariate, right? Like, I think the temptation in today's day and age, and I think some of this is propagated from how Twitter became sort of the world of hot takes in 140 characters or less, or 240 now, whatever it is, to boil things down and just say, you know what, it's because we have too many male program directors and music directors. That's the problem, you know? And it's like, well, that might be part of the problem, but there are female music directors like yourself who are also struggling finding enough female content that fits with the rest of what they're putting on the air, that suits the format and isn't, you know, entirely divergent from what the listeners are accustomed to in terms of product. So it's not just that. And so it's great to hear that, because I think there's a real temptation in culture today to just boil things down to one thing and blame it. And if we continue to do that, we're never actually going to fix the problem, because that might be one component of the issue, but it's not the entire issue.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with you. I think, again, radio has to do a better job. Consumers have to understand their responsibility in this chain as well, making sure that you're supporting everybody that you love, you know, saving everybody's songs on your playlist, like doing your part to make sure that when you're a fan of somebody, you're a fan of them. And I think that that's important. And then that shows that it's a viable business. And then you see businesses, because I think it's funny when people will look at radio and think of it as, well, that's just the thing I can turn on and hear music, or that's just where I could, you know, where it plays my song. It's a business as well. You know, managers needing to book their artists, needing to make money, needing to find opportunities. It's a business. And so we have to make sure that we prove that these are viable businesses and that there's people who actually want the services that we're all looking to provide. So, you know, that's important, that when you're a fan, that you can do your part as well. That's, you know, and we all see the super fans, and I totally appreciate those. It's kind of those secondary fans we need to be like, okay, wait, I like this, so I'm going to save it, or I'm going to tell a friend, or I'm going to request it, or I'm going to follow that artist, because all those numbers, a save, a follow, a request, they all add up.
Absolutely. And so that's how any individual tuning in can actually make a difference. You know, they
For
can
sure.
follow their favorite artist, save the song, download the single, just increase the consumer engagement if you really want to make a difference. And that will have a macro effect. And then we might change the landscape of the industry, which, you know, feels like it's time for that. Let's talk a little bit about your accentuation and your love for Canadian country music and how you exemplify that in your professional position. Because for people who may not understand this, there's Canadian content regulations in order to receive adherence with your licenses with the CRTC. And yet what I'm noticing now is a trend, which thank God this has been initiated over the last, I would say, 5 years, where a lot of country radio stations are realizing that they have less access to some of those major American stars that they've been giving number ones to for years, more access to the Brett Kissels, Dallas Smiths, Megan Patricks of the world. And so they're stepping up and really supporting those artists, getting rid of the old rotation paradigm of power American versus power Canadian. What have you been able to do on that front as it pertains to programming?
Again, you know, proving that something is a viable business is is one of the best things we can do for the industry. When I started, you know, there was maybe a major label that had domestic country artists signed to it. Like, domestic country music wasn't a business until this past decade. And not in the same capacity that it was. When we look at the big successful artists of the 90s, the Paul Brents, the Shanias, they were signed to American labels. Now, this is super insider. The consumer, I don't think, really cares what label an artist is signed to a certain extent, right? They just want access to that artist and their music. But, you know, on the insider side of that, for labels and Canadian companies and independents to invest in Canadian talent, you know, it wasn't a business the way it is now a decade ago. And I think that what we've seen happen is been amazing. Now, you know, whether that stems from CanCon regulations and having to play certain portions of your content be Canadian, that started something where, okay, I got to play it. Now, my belief is if I'm going to play this music, like if I can prove it's a viable business, it's going to be a better product for me to play. And therefore it's going to be I'm going to have a better product. And so I'm such a believer of making proof that it's a viable business, it's a successful business, and then you get better, you get the fruits of that, and like I said about investing, if I can invest in the Canadian country industry and I can help propel those artists forward, they're going to become bigger stars, and therefore it's going to come back, and you're going to see a return on that investment. And so there's been a lot of different things that we've done to try to make sure that we can propel artists forward. Some of them from a relationship standpoint, trying to make sure that, as a kid, I lived and breathed what the radio told me. If I heard the Wilkinsons 16 times that week, I was like, this is the best song in the whole wide world. This is the song. And then all of a sudden that radio station is putting them in my backyard and I have an opportunity to see them and meet them. And that to me and then you become a forever fan of that band and that station when they give you that opportunity and you build a relationship with somebody that you put up on a pedestal or you hear on the radio. And so we've done things that are really, really small. And like you said, that macro thing that really trickles and makes a huge effect. We just started bringing artists in and just putting them in front of listeners for a meal. Because it wasn't even about the music. It was about letting the audience build a relationship with that artist and an opportunity that they could never get if the radio station didn't present it to them. So the opportunity that I am now Brett Kissel's friend because I just had a slice of pizza with him and he told me about his dog and he asked about mine. That is something that
Brett would also remember the name of their dog.
Right? So it's Charlie, right?
Yes.
Exactly.
Brett would remember the name of the listener's dog. He's that kind of guy.
He is. But no,
I think creating that or taking up that charge to create more of a rapport between the fan and the artist is imperative, and I applaud you guys on that. As far as what's making it on air, do you have a major discrepancy right now between U.S. power and Canadian power? Or how does that play out in your programming system?
Yeah, it's not a major discrepancy. We have a lot of initiatives to promote Canadian talent. We have a full show that spotlights solely Canadian talent. There's not a huge discrepancy. Again, I would tell you that we go really wide with the music and the eras. We're not a station that will spin a song 80 times a week. And so between that top 40, before you hear that top 40 again, you're going to hear different 40 songs. So, our spins are not as substantial as some of the other country stations in the country, but our spin differentiation is extremely marginal. And, in some cases, in a lot of cases, when it's time and we feel an artist is in the position where they just need that extra little push, we make sure that they are the most fun song and therefore can achieve things like we've seen. One thing that I was saying is we were all patting ourselves on the back when we would get a Canadian number one, but that's out of 52 weeks. The number one or three number ones in a year, yes, we should applaud those 100%, but that's not a great score out of 52. So that's where I think it's really important to, what we've seen in the last few years, where it's gone from no female number ones or one number one in the year to being a number in the double digits like we saw last year, which is phenomenal for our industry.
It's so great for the industry. And we've seen the fruits have been born out of that too. We see arena tours now with Canadian artists headlining. And when I started in this business 20 years ago, that just wasn't happening outside of, say, a Shania or a situation like that. Paul Brandt did a few back then. But, we've seen a real proliferation of Canadians being able to step up onto the big stages. And I think that's got a lot to do with more of a community and cooperative approach at radio and program directors and music directors like yourself who have bought into this idea of, okay, it's incumbent upon us to create stars within our industry. And if we're in a gatekeeper role, we have the ability to do that. And if we're playing, what is it, 35% Canadian content? Is that
it depends on the
station. To play?
A lot of them are 35. Some of mine are even more than that. It depends on your location and your condition of license when it was granted.
Okay, so let's just say, for argument's sake, that if you're playing a third Canadian music anyway, you might as well see if there's an opportunity to have a third of those 52 weeks in a year with songs charting at number one, for a third of those to be Canadian.
Yeah.
Like, that's ultimately, I think, where we'd like to get to. But again, it has to be merit based to a degree. These things can't be overly manipulated, or the marketplace gets wise to it. So it's
Yeah, I think
definitely a delicate balance.
it's funny because just like the whole female thing, if you don't start conversations and force certain topics, it doesn't happen. So I understand the argument of that's not organic. That was probably the biggest thing I heard when we launched Girl Power Hour. You're taking a full hour, making it all females. It's not organic. You're forcing females up the chart. If I don't force females up the chart and prove that a number one can happen, it won't happen. And I think with Canadians, like if we can prove that Canadians can hang at the top of the charts, if we can push them further, if we can get behind them and let them have that runway, then I'm going to be playing 35% of songs that are absolutely phenomenal, produced really well. They had money behind them. They are just as good as everything else we're playing, rather than 35% of songs I have to play, but maybe don't hang with the others. And I think that that's where that's again comes back to proving that this is a viable business. And when I do that, others then invest in it, and it comes back to me as a better product.
Right. I think there's something to be said for breaking mental barriers. If you think about the first runner who broke the 4 minute mile, right? Up to that point, it was considered impossible. After that, hundreds of people did it, right? But there's something valuable to what you said there, in that, like, it had been 12 years between female number ones of Canadian country music acts at radio in Canada on the BDS chart. But once that was broken, many more came after it, and they did deserve to be there based on the streams and sales that we all saw. And it's just interesting to watch those dynamics play out in the marketplace and realize that, yeah, you're right. Sometimes the conversation needs to be had, and then an action needs to be taken that stimulates the interest around an artist or a campaign, and then it will actually take on its own organic life from that point.
Right. Yeah, I'm just, again, for me, it comes back to being passionate about the format, passionate about our products, passionate about the artists, and then what do I do with that passion? How do I invest in the industry? How do I invest in the artists and therefore see that return for our product? And again, like, as much as it's all sort of business jargon, these are all businesses, and it's an exciting business. And that whole saying, you never work a day in your life if you love what you do. When you have passion like this, and you can actually put forward some sort of contribution into the industry, or feel like you have a little bit of a contribution, it's just it just charges you to do the next thing and the next thing, and then we just see those results come back to us, which, it's a vicious circle of passion and being rewarded for the risks that you take.
You talked a little bit, or alluded to some of the negative aspects of it. Did you get that mostly from fans, or was it mostly from industry people? Like, who was it that had something negative to say about working hard to level the playing field?
It was industry. I mean, fans. I can't say enough about the support that we've seen from our audience when we did things like Girl Power Hour, Girl Power Play, the numerous initiatives that we did to kind of step outside the box and raise awareness. Um, that one program, that when we launched it, it doubled in ratings, it doubled in people tuning into it. The buzz around it was national. It was a Globe and Mail story the day we launched that Girl Power Hour and those T-shirts, because it was, what do you mean they're playing females? What are they doing over there? They're playing females. And so it was just, that's the spark of the conversation, where I saw the pushback was in the industry, people arguing that what I was doing was corrupting our ecosystem. It was not organic. It was standing on the soapbox. It was too preachy. It was pushing my agenda forward, whatever it was. And sure, it wasn't completely organic to be, programming an hour of females. But if I at that point, especially if I didn't thoughtfully place females through our playlist, an hour of males would have could schedule, and nobody was complaining. because they weren't aware. They were listening to it because it's what's playing on the radio. Now, when you start to play females and you hear the argument, oh well, people turn off the radio or they don't engage because they're hearing a female. Well, they're just not used to it. Keep playing the female. They'll, like I was saying before, they'll discover the song, they'll learn the artist, they'll become a fan, and then they're going to crank it up. And so I think it's
And
really
fans are
important that,
smarter than we give them credit for. Like that always used to piss me off. I have a radio background. I would hear at the time from music directors who would say shit to me like, well, fans can't tell the difference between one female to the next. I go, are you fucking kidding me? Like you can't tell the difference between the Dixie Chicks and Shania Twain? Of course you can. Of
right?
course they can. Like there's a ton of diversity within the female country music industry and within country music in general. But
Yeah.
this assertion, and I think a lot of it may have come from, and I'm not trying to point fingers at people, but it may have come from consulting companies at the time in the late 90s, early 2000s, who would spout shit like this, like don't play females back to back. And then people just gobbled it up for what it was rather than challenge it or go, wait a minute. Like, I mean, I always came from the business and I still have this. And I think it's why you and I get along so well. I'm still a fan. Like I still love country music. I still want to be on the edge, the vanguard, and hear the new artists and the new music that's coming out. And I'm fascinated by all of it. But I would often hear shit like don't play two females back to back. And I would go, well, as a fan, it doesn't offend me. Like I'm a consumer. So you're making a presumption about your consumers based off of something some consultant told you that you didn't have the balls to challenge. And so it does take people like yourself who are willing to break the mold, and go, well, hold on a second. Maybe that's not true. Maybe if we played an hour of females, people would actually enjoy it, appreciate it, and support it.
Yeah, and I think it's funny because I had somebody point out, us playing all the females, and or even just on a regular day, like I'm not grooming our music log to, watch out for the females that are back to back. My bigger issue is I have a chunk of 6 men that program all together, and I'm using those females to break them up. It's not that I don't want them back to back, but it's all ebb and flow. And so we went from like the 90s cowboy hat, predominantly male, but some very successful females, from the likes of Reba to Pam Tillis to Michelle Wright and Lisa Brokop,
Lori
who had very
Morgan, yeah,
successful
yeah.
careers here. And then the format changed a bit. It became a little bit more breathy, a little bit more crossover in the early 2000s, where the Dixie Chicks and Shania and Faith were having success. And I think that what happened to our cowboy hat, cowboy music? Well, the industry, the format just kind of grew a little bit this way, and then comes back. And just like we saw the whole, bro country area, it moved a little bit this way, and it's kind of coming back to that singer songwriter. The formats have an ebb and flow to follow listeners, because you don't want to listen to this, a group of songs that sounds like it's the same song for 25 minutes. We need to have that variation. We need to have, the Eric Church and the Corey Marks pushing it on the rock end. And we need to have the Kelsey Ballerinis, and we need to have, the Jess Moskowitz pushing it on that end. And then we're going to come back to the middle where you've got your cowboy hat, you can find your Paisley, you can find your Brett Kissel, and you can, and it's going to keep going like that. And I think that it's really important. I love that about country. We're so diverse. We're so open with whether it's, FGL on one end to an Ashley McBride, ripping your heart out and you thanking her for it. That's what country can do. And so the fact that we're so open to that, and should be so open to that, has changed the playing field a little bit. But people are scared of change. People are intimidated. So when somebody tells you something like, hey, if you make sure you don't have two females back to back, you're going to be successful. Well, I mean, that's stuck for quite a while.
Right. And a lot of people in this business aren't looking to make a mark. They just want to keep their job.
Amen. Especially right now, right? Like,
there's a lot of that. Yeah.
It's been a tough year for our industry.
Yeah, for sure. No, I love what you said about the diversity within the format. I think that country music begins to choke itself out when trends initiate this idea that everybody needs to use the same group of writers, hire the same producers, and then you get a bunch of artists who just sound the same or branded the same, and and country music begins to not appeal to as broad a base as it once did. So I'm grateful for the diversity within the format. I love it when someone takes a real chance and does something like Corey Marks has done, where he really infuses the rock sound. And it's like, all right, that's interesting. Let's see if the marketplace is ready for it. And in some cases, it's not yet, but it's going to initiate a movement within the format whereby more artists who perform that type of music are going to be drawn to taking those creative risks. And that's where the brilliance is in art. It's when someone stands out. It's when someone decides to do something no one's done before.
Well, like you said, this industry, not just radio, not just country music, but everything needs trailblazers to start different directions. And it's how ironic is it that the idea that, people couldn't tell females apart, and then we kind of pushed them out of the format, and it went so far that way that now we have that problem with a whole group of male artists who sound the same and who, maybe aren't as identifiable, and we're using the females to break that up. So again, it's ebbs and flows. It's just trying to be conscious of where everything is landing and how we need to keep moving forward. And I feel like just having those conversations and taking in other people's perspectives is such an important thing to do in any of that growth.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Let's talk a little bit about radio itself. As you mentioned earlier, it's been a tough year for your industry. The radio industry has had multiple tough years back to back, I would say, especially in the last decade. It's not like syndication is a new phenomenon. It's been around for over 50 years, but we're seeing more and more syndication, more and more conglomeration. Do you believe that trend is ultimately going to continue to contribute to the reduction of engagement with, like, I understand saving money and cutting costs and increasing margins. I get it. But I still think, and maybe this is just me as a fan, and maybe it's my age, but tuning into your local radio station to get information that's applicable to your community and proprietary to your community is still an asset that radio just can't ignore.
Radio is a tool. People use it to connect. People use it to be informed. People use it to be entertained. And I think that, like a lot of businesses, there's always been other options in radio, whether it was 8 tracks, cassettes, vinyl, CDs, MP3s, like there's always been other options. And right now it's just streaming services. And so, I don't think that because DSPs have come into play, because you can have an app on your phone, it means people aren't listening to radio. And we still see that. We're still seeing large engagement. Again, it's a business. We're owned by a company who needs to make money. I'm excited to work for a company that likes to pay me. Like my kids like to eat too. So, it's a business. So, despite the year that we've all experienced, despite the challenges that come with a pandemic, when you look at how radio has changed, like the format, we kind of pushed it really far one way, whether it was no live bodies in certain day parts, whether it was complete syndication over certain parts of the business. And then we kind of saw it come back a little bit. And it's interesting to me, we see things come back as a new idea, and it's really just something that we used to do or something that was successful previously. But that's how industries they continue to change, to continue to grab people's attention, continue to change the business, because they have to continue to make money. So I don't know that, complete syndication is ever the answer. I think that live bodies, live people being able to deliver that information moment by moment is really important. But is it a viable business to be able to have people on the air 24/7 when we see a reduction in clients, because there's so many options for clients as well? So it's a balancing act. And does anybody have it figured out what well or right? I mean, it's like any other business where something may work or it may not. And if it doesn't, you got to modify. And so, I'm grateful that I work in a company that allows people in my position to get behind things that they're passionate about, allows our on-air announcers to figure out what works in Ottawa is different than what works in Toronto, is different than what works in Kingston, and allows those announcers to really have the runway to do that. I'm grateful that on a music scale, we can differentiate, we can do things that we are passionate about. So I think that those things are what make us win. And I think that if you have a syndicated show in the middle of all of that, if you're playing a countdown on weekends so that you can have access to bigger artists we don't get access to as Canadian radio, I don't think those are all bad. I think it's all about moderation, like everything else, right? And so I think whatever you can figure out, whatever the formula is or the percentage is that makes your business work well so that you can give that runway in other areas, then I'm grateful for that. And I think that it's not going to be the same for two different companies. You know, I'm grateful to work for a company, or I'm in a different position where my company has a lot of different products. It's not just radio. So in a year like we've had, where radio has lost a huge portion of clientele, you know, we have other ends of the business that are holding that up for us. And if we go through a situation where those parts of the business aren't doing as well, we got to just hope it's timed out that the different portions of the business can help support one another. But kind of like a family, right? Like, I think that nobody's going to do anything that nobody has a perfect solution. And I don't think syndication is bad. I don't think it's ruining radio if it's done in moderation, if it's done in if it's teed up properly, if it can be engaging. And there's different levels of syndication. Taking a show from the US and putting it on is different than having a body in one market that plays on 4 different stations, is different than voice tracking a show and not having anybody there but having something play. It's different than having somebody live. Like, we have technology where somebody can be live in multiple markets, but they're still turning on the microphone and speaking live. And so but that would still be called syndication. But that's very different than taking a show that a different person or personality in another country recorded yesterday and putting that on. Right. So I think that there's variations and there's no perfect formula. And it's, you know, businesses are going to continue to try to make money and try to do things that work. So
you've had an incredibly successful career, and I don't see that changing anytime soon. Do you have any aspirations to do anything else in this business? Would you ever manage artists? Would you ever work on the other side of the industry and promote records or anything like that? Do you have any aspirations in that realm at some point?
See, I'm a big believer in, if I can learn what everybody else does, if I can learn more about what you do, if I can learn more about what Bushy does on the road, I'm going to be better at my job. And so I was given the opportunity to do a lot of things. You know, I did get a phone call from Bushy one day saying, I can't make it to an event in Ottawa. Do you want to step in and be part of Brett's team? And I did that. And oh my gosh, no wonder that man's so skinny. All you do is run. You know, and it gave me such an appreciation for the tour managers, but also for what Brett goes through on a day-to-day, or what Louis sees, or what you see, and what you guys are.
Bushy is going to be just so happy you called him skinny. I'm going to make him tune in just for that comment alone.
I mean, I understand how he can manage he can double fist the way he does too. But I mean, I think that I think it's so important. So, I mean, I've gotten the opportunity to try a few things. I've certainly thought, you know, what is next for me. I don't know that I have that figured out, but I love talking about opportunities. I love the industry. So we'll see where that takes me. I'm happy with what I do.
Well, that's great to hear, and I'm grateful that you're in the position you're in, and I do hope you stay there for a while, because I think the industry needs you. But there are plenty of other places in this industry that could benefit from somebody who's so open to learning and growing and challenging themselves too. And I like what you said. I couldn't agree more. I often think that agents and managers should have to hop on the bus, spend a full day with the band and artist. And admittedly, I haven't done that in a while, but I have done it. And really understand what the artist and the team endures on an entire day to get ready for a 60 or 75 or 90-minute show. It's like you just have no idea how tight the timing is, how things need to line up perfectly. And, you know, we'd all have so much more empathy and such a better understanding for the other roles in this business if more people would embrace the attitude you have. So congratulations on all your success, and thanks for taking the time to do this today.
Thank you. I appreciate it. And I appreciate you doing this for the industry. I think shining a light on all the different facets of it is such a great thing that you do.
I love it. Thank you again.